What's up, friends? Dan Vega here, back with another tutorial, and today we're talking about GitHub Copilot for Java developers. So GitHub Copilot was released back in June, but it was a technical preview and it had very limited language support at the time and very limited IDE support. It was only for Visual Studio Code. So what it does is it really helps to suggest some code, whether it's one line or entire functions. So as you start to type out a method signature, it will start to make suggestions to you. You can even get a little bit more complex and write out comments to try and describe what method you're trying to create, and it will make suggestions to you there as well. So what we're going to do today, we'll take a look at the Copilot website. We'll talk about what it is and what it can do. And then we'll dive into IntelliJ, because that's the reason we're here today. So again, at GitHub Universe, which was recently 2021, they announced support for IntelliJ because it was just for Visual Studio Code to begin with. So we're here today because we can do this in IntelliJ. So we're going to fire up IntelliJ. We'll create some basic Java examples, and then we'll take a look at a Spring Boot example too of GitHub Copilot in action, writing some code for us. So I think this is going to be a fun one. I hope you're excited about it. And what are we waiting for? Let's get into it. All right, so here we are on copilot.github.com, and this is your AI pair programmer. So the big thing here is this is still in technical preview. They're still collecting data, trying to improve the product. But with GitHub Copilot, you get suggestions for whole lines or entire functions right inside your editor. So you can sign up here to get on the preview. There's some examples here. We'll get into these examples. We're going to use Java today, obviously. But we'll get into kind of some examples and different ways that you can ask GitHub Copilot to kind of kick off some suggestions. The reason we're here today, though, is GitHub Copilot is now available as an extension for NeoVim, JetBrains, and Visual Studio Code. So originally when this came out in June, it was just available in Visual Studio Code. Now it's available in JetBrains. So we are able to jump into IntelliJ today and take a look at some examples in both Java and Spring Boot. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'll give you a link to this below. Go ahead and search through this site. There's a bunch more information on what it can do, what languages it supports, etc. So with that, let's jump into IntelliJ. All right, so here we are in IntelliJ, and the first thing I want to do is talk about the plugin. So you're going to need a plugin for this. So if you head over to plugins, whether you're here on the home screen or you're in IntelliJ, you can go into plugins. You're going to want to search the marketplace for GitHub Copilot. And there was actually already an update for this today as I'm recording this. So they're already continuing to listen to feedback and improve this. Again, there's a link here that you can learn more. That's the link that we just looked at, and just some more information. So there's a usage to get started with GitHub Copilot. Visit the Getting Started guide. So there's some good information here and in the documentation for the repo. But once this is installed, you are ready to go. So we're going to create a new project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Spring Boot project today. Now you can just create a Java project if you want, but I'm going to show off some both Java and Spring support for what we're doing here with GitHub Copilot. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into YouTube tutorials so that I can go ahead and put this on GitHub. So if we jump down here, onto Dev, YouTube. And so what I want to do is I'll put this in, let's just do this in Java. And we'll call this GitHub Copilot. And that should be good. Okay, so now we are going to use Java, Maven, and let's go ahead and Dan Vega. We'll use Java 17. You can use whatever version of Java you want. And we're just going to create a simple web project here, not doing anything crazy. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is actually just create a simple test class. And what we're going to do is just go into this class, and right away we should get some suggestion here. So it's thinking, hey, you just created a base class. You may want a public static void main, and inside of that main method, you probably want to do something like print out hello world. So that's kind of the first suggestion that we're going to get there. So I'm going to save that and actually just close that out. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and I'm going to create a new package. We'll call this the classic utils package, where we may have some different utility classes in here. This will give me a good place to kind of just start. So I'm going to start with a math utils. So let's say math utils. Now this is going to be nothing interesting, but the first way, well, you can see that we're already starting to get some suggestions here. Public static double round. So if you want to round something, but the second way that we can get a suggestion here is we could start to type out some method signatures. So I'm going to say int sum, and as you can see here, it's starting to suggest that we can use the arguments a and b, and they're both integers because we're returning an int, right? So if I go ahead and auto-complete that, and I auto-completed that in the previous one using the tab key, so I tabbed out. Now I auto-completed that, and it's saying, hey, if you want to get the sum from two arguments a and b, the best way to do that is to return a plus b. So that sounds good. Also, I'm going to go ahead and start typing out subtract. And you can see that, hey, we're starting to see a pattern here. It knows what we're trying to do. There's multiply, so I'm going to tab through that. And let's try divide. And that looks good. So it took some context there from the method signatures, or the method names in that instance, and it figured out what we wanted to do. So that's pretty cool. So the next one that I'm going to do is we'll do some string utils. Everybody has a class like this somewhere in their code base. And what I'm going to do is, let's say public string reverse. So I want to reverse a string. And so it's going to accept an argument of string. It's going to create a new instance of the string builder, and it's going to loop through those. So it's going to take the length. So it's going to actually work backwards and build that new string. So this is one way to do it. Now I'm going to try and hold down the Option key and bracket, and you'll see that it gives us another way to do it. Now this is a little bug that I think that I'm getting when I do that. I get these quotes. I'm not sure why, but this is another way that you can do it. So there's one or more suggestions, and it's going to give those to you. So let's just back up here. And one thing I want to do is you can also hit Option Enter and open up GitHub Copilot. And now you're going to see all of these suggestions here. Now I happen to like this one. This is the more concise one. You can check for null. Again, you're kind of iterating over those. The one that we saw before, we're kind of looping over those backwards. So there's all these solutions, and I'm just going to go ahead and accept solution one. So great way to look at some different options there. And then maybe we want to public string uppercase. Yes, we're going to take a string and we're just going to call to uppercase on it. So there's some pretty cool things. Let's keep diving a little bit further. So I'm going to create a new Java class called calendar utils. So the reason I'm doing this one is because, some people may not be familiar with a lot of the new date APIs. And so this may be a way to kind of get some information about what is the best way to do this. Now, I will say the suggestions aren't always the best way to do something or the most efficient way. What they're doing is really crawling GitHub or different repositories and looking for solutions that kind of match that. So we're using AI and machine learning to kind of build up this predictive model, right? So let's start with, I want to be able to calculate days between dates, right? So I don't want a string. I want actually a local date. So I'm going to say local date. And now there's a start date. Oh, let's go ahead and import that. So now it's saying, okay, you want local dates instead of string. So I'll have a start date and an end date. So how would I do that? So you can use the start date dot until end date dot 2 days. So that was able to fix that for us. Well, although start date dot until, let's go ahead and see what actually want the chrono unit. I don't know why that one was coming up. So let's say that what I wanted to do was int, I want chrono unit dot days. Okay, so there's what we're looking for. So it's weird that in preparation for this, that was the one I got suggested, and now I'm getting a different suggestion. So again, we're in technical preview, still kind of running through this, trying to understand, how useful this is. So what if I wanted to find, what if I wanted to get the day from a date, and I wasn't quite sure how to do that? So let's go ahead and do this. And it says return date.get day of month. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Great. What if I wanted to get a year from a date? How would I do that? Return date.get year. That looks good. So just some more examples there. And one more I want to look at here is let's go ahead and create a Java class called, actually, I'm going to create a service. This is more of a service. Let's go ahead and create a new package called service. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and create a whiteboard. Oops, Java. We're going to create a whiteboard service. And in here, I want to do a couple things. So if you are looking at the repo for this, I put a link into, let's actually pop back over to the browser. So I found some interview questions, maybe some whiteboard questions you may come across. So if you want to go through here, these are some things you may have to build out. So I wanted to do a whiteboard service that kind of helped us solve some of those problems. So the one way that we've been looking at kind of asking Copilot for some suggestion is by giving a name and kind of giving some arguments to a method. So the signature of a method, right? So now what we're going to do, instead of doing that, we're going to kind of explain to Copilot what we're trying to do. So I'm going to do that by using a comment. So I'm going to simply say that this method, I want to try and figure out if it's a palindrome. So if it's a palindrome, it's going to go ahead and do some suggestions here for us. So again, public static Boolean, we actually don't need it to be a static, but we'll fix that. So I'm going to go into Copilot and look at the different suggestions. So there are some suggestions here. It doesn't matter which one we use for now. I'm going to go ahead and accept this one. And now that works. Now does it work, right? So we'll take a look at that in a second. So another one I'm going to give you is just a little bit more complex. We'll say method will remove any given substring from a string. So that's a little bit more complex. And Copilot is able to look at that and go, okay, you probably want a method called a remove substring that will take in a string as an argument and a sub as the second argument. And then it will look for that and try to remove that. And so I'll go ahead and save that. And finally, if you wanted to do something, another one of those examples were count the number of times a substring occurs in a string. And there we go, another example. So that's pretty cool. But now I think one of the things we're going to ask ourselves is, what, something else I pointed out, I don't think I'm going to get into it now, but if you are on my newsletter, so danvega.dev, and yeah, so the reason I'm talking about this in my latest newsletter, I talked a lot about GitHub Copilot for IntelliJ. And the reason I did that is because GitHub Universe just happened. They had a bunch of things kind of come out. So one of the things I talked about here was GitHub Copilot. We're doing a lot of the things that I talked about in here. But, does that work? So I actually went in and created a test for that is Palindrome. And we were able to see it kind of work. And so let's go ahead and do that because it actually helps with the test too. So let's generate a test. So I'm going to say, let's generate. We want to generate a test. I just want to test this one out real quick. And if I go in here, you'll see that it's going to help us. Hey, let's go ahead and create a instance, or we don't need an instance of Whiteboard service because that was actually a static method. So is this a palindrome? And if you're not familiar with what a palindrome is, it means that the characters are the same forwards and backwards. So as you can see, R-A-C-E, R-A-C-E, C-A-R. So this should pass. So if we go ahead and run this, it passes. So not only is it writing code for us, but it's writing effective code, code that works, right? So that's pretty cool. So I think the next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and create a new, we'll get into some Spring Boot specific stuff. So I'm going to create a new model folder. I'm going to create a new class called employee. Now this is where I found that generating this kind of stuff is a little bit easier. As you see, as we go into here, it goes, okay, well, you probably want a string, right? Yeah, that sounds good. You probably want an email. I also want an ID. So it's private string, or let's do an int actually. So this is my model. Now I would expect it to like really help me kind of generate all the different constructors and getters and setters. But like I said, I think to be honest, it's just easier to generate these from the IDE. Now this is also a really good place where a record class would come in. So, I've been using records a lot more lately, and you could see this did help with the two strings. So we're going to go ahead and save that. So again, if you want to cut down on this boilerplate and you're running a newer version of Java, take a look at records. That will kind of cut all of this down. Okay, so now that we have an employee, we probably want to create an employee service. So let's say employee service, and at the top of employee service, I'm going to create a list of employees. We'll call them employees. And actually, let's... All right, and then we'll say new array list, and I'm just going to initialize that. So the next thing I need is a instructor. So it's kind of suggesting some stuff here, but I'm just going to go ahead and create a employee service, and we're going to create. We're just going to add a new employee. So it's not going to help with everything, but it will do some things for us. So that's the first thing. So now in a service where we're kind of working with an in-memory representation of some data here, the first thing I might want to do is get all my employees. And look at that. Public list of employee, get all employees, return employees. That is right, but for whatever reason, I did not spell that right. Employees. Okay. So the next thing we might want to do is, get an employee. And this get employee is going to take an ID as an argument. It's going to turn the employees list into a stream and then use the filter function, which takes a lambda expression, and it's going to say, hey, is that ID equal to the ID that was passed in? It's going to find that first one because we just want one, or it's going to return null. So that actually looks like a method I want. Now I want to add an employee. Look at that. Now I want to update employee. Look at that. Now I want to delete an employee. Look at that. So it was able to kind of derive that from the things that we were doing in that class. So that was really cool. Again, I don't know how useful this is going to be in my day-to-day. I haven't really been using this in day-to-day stuff yet, but it's pretty cool to see this stuff being generated for me. All right, so I think the last thing that we're going to do here is create a controller and test this out. So let's create a new package. We will call this the employee. Oh, sorry, we are in a package. Let's create a package, create a new class called employee controller. This is going to be a REST controller with a request mapping of, let's see if it helps us out. It did in one of my tests, but it doesn't seem to be doing so now. It actually suggested employee, and I want to do employees. So the first thing we're going to need is our employee service. So I'm going to say private final employee service, and we'll add a constructor parameter for that. That is stuff that I can auto generate. So the first thing that it's suggesting here is a request mapping of /hello, string hello, employee service.getEmployee. That doesn't really make sense. Let's go ahead and jump into Copilot and see if there's any other suggestion. So here's some. We have a default request mapping here to return just a string. We have a request mapping. So this is basically a get mapping, and we're going to return employee service.employees. This is actually what I'm looking for. I want to get all employees. Actually, is that employees? No, I think we have get employees. And actually, I didn't write that, so let's jump over there. So we have a get all employees. So that is right. No, this is right. So employee service.get. No, that isn't right. This one's right. Okay, so let's go ahead and accept this. That should work. What is it complaining about? Oh, so we do have a problem here. Let's go ahead and mark this as a service so that Spring knows about it. And do we not have get all employees? Again, when you don't write your method, this is, okay, so this is returning a list of employees and this is returning a string. So close enough. Now let's actually turn this upside down. So those were the suggestions. Let's try get all employees. So /all. So this returns a list of, this looks like more what we want. So that worked out well. So sometimes, you know, you can derive it from a comment, you can derive it from a method signature. Again, this is all kind of new to me, so I'm still just kind of playing around with this. So what if we wanted to get a specific employee? Get employee by ID. So /ID. Okay, so this is going to get us close, but I'm going to change this. So what I would normally do is a get mapping. There we go. That's what I want. And then I want this to be a path variable. Okay, so there's no get employee by ID. There's a get employee. So you can see it's kind of getting there, not doing the greatest job. But let's go ahead and start this application up. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And all I want to do is test this out. So what I'm going to do is run a quick test here in, so we're just going to get all employees. Let's go ahead and run that. That probably isn't what we want. Okay, 404 not found / employees. I'm sure I just did something wrong here. / employees. This is a request mapping. Employees. So hmm. All right, there we go. There's our one employee. And then if we wanted to, we can say /1, and we should just get that single employee, and we do. So I think that's really where I'm going to end this. Again, this is a technical preview. Copilot to me is a really cool project. You can also use it, in the repo that you pull down. I'll probably have some stuff in the resources folder. You can use it for other languages like JavaScript. So if you're working on a front end and a back end, you'll get some kind of code assistance there as well. But really, this is something new. Just the beginning, if this is just the alpha of it and it's not even released to the world, this is beyond cool. Just the things that I can start to do. So again, I haven't been able to use this in my day-to-day workflow yet. This is really me just kind of checking out this project. So I'll try to incorporate this more into some day-to-day workflows and report back to you and let you know really, what it's doing for me, if it's helping out in any places, and we'll see where it goes. But I thought this is pretty cool, and I hope you found this info useful. If you did, please leave me a comment below. Hit that subscribe button, thumbs up, whatever you can do to tell me that you enjoyed this content. I'd be very, very grateful. So with that, I think we'll call this a day. And as always, friends, happy coding.